let's just say you're looking at your backyard. You would like to have more food coming into your house, maybe 10% of your food coming from your backyard. Now you know what your goal is. How can I accomplish that? What are the resources I already have? Do I have chickens in my backyard? Can I look at those chickens and say, can I connect my chickens to the food that I want to create? You know,
Mm.
what you're doing is you're looking for interconnections. You're going to take those interconnections and then you're going to make a design plan on, hey, if I go to my chickens in the morning, I'm going to collect the eggs. I'm going to give them any food scraps that came from the kitchen. And then I'm going to go over to the garden. I'm going to see what I'm picking out from the garden. Any scraps I'll take and drop back off the chickens as I go back into the house, that sort of thing.
This is the Homesteading for Beginners podcast, and I'm Mona Weathers, your host. If you desire to start and maintain a healthy homestead that aligns with your goals for self-sufficiency in a way that is sustainable and profitable, then you are in the right place. Be sure to like and subscribe the YouTube channel or follow on your favorite podcast player so that you don't miss an episode. I am interviewing today my friend Larry Wheeler. Surprise, surprise, I met Larry on Clubhouse. I talk about Clubhouse all the time on this podcast, but it's like, it was just the perfect timing. You know, God orchestrated this amazing thing with all these people who wanted to talk about growing food and homesteading and all the things. And we all got to talk to each other and support each other during a really strange time in our history. So Larry, thank you so much for coming and just having this extended Clubhouse room conversation.
Of course, of course. Love being here.
Yeah. So let our listeners know a little bit about you. Like, where are you currently? You know, maybe even a little bit about your homesteading journey and that sort of thing.
So I guess when we met on Clubhouse, I was still in Virginia and living there. And recently, I guess with it, well, I don't know how recent a year ago is, but a year ago, I accepted a job at a seed company here in Missouri. And so moved here in April. And so, yeah, loving Missouri now, great place to be moved to. And I guess we'll talk a little bit later about how that
Yeah.
happened.
Yeah, we can talk about that. I would like to know because I only know a little bit about how it happened. So I'd love to hear how the whole story. So Larry's going to help us understand, and I know a little bit about it. I still am a little fuzzy on it, but a term called permaculture design and what that means and how that can help your homesteading experience, your gardening experience. And so Larry's going to give us like the super basic description of it and understanding of it. And then maybe if I have more deep questions, I'll ask them. So Larry, what is permaculture design?
So when people ask what is permaculture, and this was a lot of the things that we were talking about on Clubhouse, and that's the reason we started the whole permaculture club on Clubhouse, is because a lot of gardeners, even a lot of people who are into the environmental sciences, tend to get confused as to what permaculture actually is and how you actually apply it to whether it's the garden, not realizing that permaculture is a design science you can apply to anything. So a business, a community, um, just about anything, a school. So you can apply those permaculture principles to just about anything. And the easiest way that I've come up with to explain permaculture is organized common sense. So if you can take organized common sense and think on those terms, that's usually what you're going to find in permaculture. Just to give you guys a little background, I'm no permaculture expert. And the great thing about permaculture, you don't have to be an expert to talk about permaculture. Because what Bill Mollison, David Holmgren, the founders of permaculture did is they studied indigenous cultures and communities to find out what were those common sense rules that they followed that allowed them to live in harmony with nature and their community. And so what these guys did is they wrote this all down into a book, the Permaculture Designer Manual. David Holmgren has several books as well you can read as well on permaculture. But those are basic principles that allow you to interact not only with your community, but also in the environment, that is based off of those three ethics, which is care of the earth, care of people, and a return of surplus. And if you're doing those three things, then what you're doing is permaculture. Now, where the confusion comes in is where a lot of people think that permaculture is a thing. So I have a permaculture garden. I have a permaculture business. So no, your business is based off of those principles, or your garden is based off of those principles, but your garden is not a permaculture garden, because you're going to first look at, is what I'm doing going to harm the earth? Is what I'm doing going to take care or harm people? And is what I'm doing actually going to make a surplus and not be mining or sucking away resources? And so if you've checked all those boxes, those three things, then you are doing something in line with permaculture. Now, permaculture brings in all of the different techniques that you would in all of the organic, natural gardening aspects that you would bring in. So whether it's putting in, you name it, ponds, aquaponics, that's actually how I got into permaculture, is following the rabbit hole down aquaponics and hydroponics. So all of those are different techniques that can all be utilized by permaculture. As long as you're following those three ethics, then you can utilize it in your design. And that's where it all comes together. Permaculture brings it all together in that it's a design science. So therefore, you're looking at, not only do I want to put in a garden, but how does that garden interact with my daily chores? How does that garden interact with my community? How does that garden give back to the environment? And when you're thinking about that whole system design, which is another piece that permaculture brings in as well, that whole system design, rotational grazing, mob grazing, all of that can be brought into permaculture. When you're thinking about that whole design from the beginning to the end, and how that design is continuously regenerative, then what you're doing is designing using permaculture. It's not the technique, it's the principles behind it that you're actually putting into practice.
Okay. Yeah. So I do have a trouble following the thought process of the permaculture design. So I should probably start there. Like, okay, can you like walk me through an example of using like an example, a hands-on example of someone who says they want to do, or how do you say it? Like, how do you say it? Use permaculture, do permaculture? What words do you use for that, first of all?
Yeah, use permaculture. You could say use permaculture. Yeah.
Okay. So how would someone who wants to use permaculture in their gardening space, what exactly would they be doing?
The first thing I always recommend when people are thinking about designing something utilizing permaculture is to first use the easiest way you can produce things without making major mistakes is just put it on paper. Write it down on paper. First thing you want to do is you're going to start thinking about, what am I trying to accomplish? That's always the first. If you don't know where you're going, you're never going to get there. And so it's kind of like a map. I can't give you a map of where someone else's house is 5 miles down the road if that wasn't the goal. If the goal was for you to get to McDonald's the other direction, it's not going to work. So when you're designing something, you want to think, where am I going? How am I going to, then you can say, how am I going to get there? Then you can look at the principles and then start putting those principles together into how that can happen. So let's just say you're looking at your backyard. You would like to have more food coming into your house, maybe 10% of your food coming from your backyard. Now you know what your goal is. How can I accomplish that? What are the resources I already have? Do I have chickens in my backyard? Can I look at those chickens and say, can I connect my chickens to the food that I want to create? So what you're doing is you're looking for interconnections. You're going to take those interconnections and then you're going to make a design plan on, hey, if I go to my chickens in the morning, I'm going to collect the eggs. I'm going to give them any food scraps that came from the kitchen. And then I'm going to go over to the garden. I'm going to see what I'm picking out from the garden. Any scraps I'll take and drop back off the chickens as I go back into the house. That sort of thing. Is my herb garden close where I can walk and see it and watch it on a regular basis and make sure that those high value crops are right there? And so it's a big picture look where I want to go. Then you're looking at the interconnections of your pieces, putting those together, and then coming up with a plan on how you're going to first implement or build it, and then how do you maintain it? And that's a lot of people tend to miss that part of, they'll build something, but then they don't think about, well, how do I maintain it? What is the ongoing maintenance? What has to happen? Is it watering, or did I already put in irrigation? Is it pruning, or am I not doing any pruning at all? Or is it harvesting? When does that happen? Am I making sure that my timing is on with that? Permaculture design not only is about designing in a space, it's also about designing in time as well. because you may put some ornamentals first, and then you may have some perennials behind that. But you want to make sure, okay, if I do the ornamentals, I'm going to pull those out, or the annuals, I'm going to pull those out. Then I'm going to put new ones in, but I need to make sure I'm not disturbing their perennials, because that's going to take an entire year for those to actually start producing. And so you're also planning in time as well as in space. It's more of a holistic look as to what you're trying to do. And remember, this also works not only for a garden, but this also could work for a business. How can my business pieces interconnect with each other? Do I have a nonprofit and a profit that I can make those work together and help each other, and they can both grow together? Is it going to be helping the community? Am I, producing something that is, sustainable, regenerative? So yeah, permaculture helps you with that whole design process from the beginning to the end.
Okay, so something clicked in my head when you said the business, because that's exactly what I feel like I'm doing right now. I'm teaching other people to do. Like, I'm trying to get people to look at it as a whole, and so that you're not spreading yourself so thin, doing all these different things. It's all connecting so that it goes into one continuous flow,
Yeah.
So that hit me right and I thought about this too as you were talking just now. I think I've been doing some of these things because I've been gardening for 15 years. Naturally came to this conclusion that it needs to all fit together so that I'm not doing so much work, and so that it's connected and using all the things that I have available on my property. So I maybe that's the issue I've had, is because I've already been doing some of these things, and I'm like, well, isn't that what everybody's doing? But I think maybe not. Maybe everyone, give me an example of a bad, a non-permaculture way of somebody's doing it in a way that they're not using permaculture. Maybe that will help some people too. I think giving that opposite.
Okay, so you're absolutely right. When you talk about these are things that I've already been doing. Remember I said earlier that permaculture, my way of interpreting permaculture, organized common sense. These are things we've already been doing. These are things that have been passed down for generations of, hey, if I'm not using those leaves, put those in a compost pile, and I can get those back and put those back into my garden later. It's reusing those input and output streams continuously and making sure that you have a flow. So if someone were to say, well, if I wasn't using permaculture, what would my, let's say, garden would look like? We talked earlier about having a garden. I want to go into my backyard. I want to be able to produce 10, 20% of my food. And what I was going to do that, I was going to have chickens that are going to handle my compost. I'm going to have a garden where I'll take any of the excess from the garden and drop it into the chickens, and they'll continue to compost that. I could take their manure at the end of the year and then put that back into the garden when it's resting in the winter. So all of that is a flow in a system. You're making sure you're taking care of the earth. You're making sure you're getting more return than what you're putting in. The opposite of that is, well, I'm just going to put in ornamental trees in my backyard. And then you decide, well, maybe I'll do a garden, and I'll put a garden all the way in the back side of my property, and I'll grow a garden there. Well, you haven't thought about where the water is going to come from. And so you don't have a 100-foot hose. So now you got to go get a 100-foot hose and run your hose all the way out there. And then you realize, wait a minute, I don't get off of work until late because of my daily commute. So I won't be able to even water the garden. It'll be dark by the time I water the garden. I don't have any lights out there. That's somebody who did not even think about it. So, well, what can I do? Well, I could spray Miracle-Gro and put all kinds of fertilizer and chemicals and things on that, and maybe that'll help me. Well, that's not very regenerative, and that's not helping the earth. So, and then it could get worse. Well, okay, now I'm just not going to take care of it. I'm just going to leave the garden there. I'm not going to worry about it. Everything's growing everywhere. It's a total mess. And now what do? How do I clean that up? How do I get that back to at least just a backyard where I could do something where it's overgrown? I got stuff everywhere. I got hoses strung everywhere. It's just a total mess. I don't feel like doing it. It's no flow. I can't maintain it. That would be the exact opposite of someone who designed their backyard using permaculture, as opposed to someone who just threw stuff together and then just trying to figure it out and try to make it happen. And then it just all falls apart.
Okay, I see that. And now, with you describing that, I know a lot of people are probably thinking, that's exactly what I'm doing. So if you're listening to this and he just described you, maybe you should consider using permaculture. So I want to ask you about your family as well. You are a father of 5 kids, right?
Hmm.
And a wife. Can you tell me a little bit about your family and how your family is your family involved in your homesteading life and all that?
Yeah, absolutely. They are definitely involved in a big part of it. Like I said, when we first got started with backyard homesteading, I'm in a suburban backyard as far as my homesteading style. We started in Virginia on maybe a half an acre lot. I think we started with a small garden, and then we got chickens, which was the gateway drug everyone talks about. Once you get chickens, it's downhill from there. And then we progressed to quail, ducks, rabbit, and I think that was all the animals we had in the suburban area. Fruit trees, gardening, and a lot of the garden started from my interest in. I've always been interested in the environment. I've always been interested in planting trees. I've always been interested in growing stuff. I started down the rabbit hole of looking into aquaponics. When I saw that aquaponics was a complete ecosystem where the fish would feed the plants would filter the water for the fish and return that clean water down to the fish. And all the human was doing was feeding the fish to get that cycle going. I was like, oh man, this is perfect, perfect ecosystem. That led me to, well, that's exactly what you're trying to create with permaculture design is you're designing those ecosystems where the human is interacting with it and things are getting better year after year after year because of that joint partnership between you and nature. And so that's what drew us in and that's what got us started homesteading. I was actually looking through a seed magazine. I'm pretty sure you guys have all seen it. It's called Baker Creek Heirloom Seeds.
Mm-hmm.
And in front of that magazine, it said, hey, if you love seeds, send us your resume. And so I said, well, I'll send them my resume. They'll probably never call. They're huge. Everyone knows who they are. Well, I sent it to them. And the next day, I believe I was on the call and they were like, yeah, we would love to talk with you and see what, how you could help us. And so my marketing, video production background was actually something that they were looking for, someone to come in and help them with media. Next thing I know, I'm on a plane, I'm out in Missouri checking it out. And more of our friends from Clubhouse said, oh, you got to come to Missouri. It's the greatest place on the earth. And I was like, oh, sure. Well, I got out here and I was like, yes, I'm doing it. And so we moved here to Missouri. We're in a small town. And so I'm still doing a urban kind of suburban farmstead type thing. We're still only on half an acre. And so we're doing similar processes. Aquaponics, I have aquaponics tanks going. I have the chickens going, working on the quail. Going to talk to Jasmine about getting some more quail. So we're just basically rebuilding our systems and putting everything back into place here in Missouri. And so, yeah, my 5 kids, my wife are all a part of it. They love the chickens, they love the fish, they love the garden. They each have their own little places where they like to jump in. Some of my daughters like the chickens more. My sons like the seeds and the gardening a little bit more. So yeah, it's definitely a family affair.
That's awesome. It was so fun to watch, hear that transition for you guys and you're moving because we were on Clubhouse rooms while that all was happening. So it was so fun to hear all that. And then you actually moved close to Jasmine Bass, right? We had her
Yeah.
on here talking about quail. So it's really fun. So I do want to know, as far as the permaculture use, how is Baker Creek as far as that goes? Do they use permaculture?
In some ways, yes. They're utilizing permaculture in some of their techniques in the gardens. Our farm manager, who just actually came on right around the same time I came on, he also has a little bit of permaculture in his background as well. And so he's starting to utilize that within some of the processes there at Baker Creek. They've always been very connected to different people in the permaculture community. And so there's always little things that they're adding. I always think, hey, there's always more we could add, but hey, it's moving along. And so, yeah, there is culture background there at Baker Creek for sure.
Right. I have been following Baker Creek since the kids were little. That's how I, the oldest daughter was a little girl. I remember if you ever get a Baker Creek catalog, it's just this beautiful thing that you want to put on your coffee table and enjoy for the whole year. I love it. Oh, actually, I have one right here. I have one, the big one from a couple years ago. And they always have their children in the catalog. And I have been following since I think she was like a baby or maybe like 3 or 4 or something like that. And now she's like a teenager. How old is she now?
Yeah, late teens, if you're talking
Yeah.
about their first daughter. So they have 4 kids now,
I love that because it's a very family, it feels very family oriented, like very family
for sure.
oriented businesses. I hope to come visit there one day. That would be just so awesome.
You have to come and visit.
Okay. I've never been to Missouri. My father-in-law was born and raised in Missouri. I think we drove through Missouri coming to Georgia. I believe we did, but so one of the things that you shared about in permaculture, I remember this, and it was like, this is something I feel like nobody really does, or people don't consciously really do this, where you wait a season before you plant anything. You wait a full year to watch what your land is doing in order to get that flow and use your land properly. And I did sort of hear because we just weren't ready to put in a full garden at the time, but I was finally able to see, we waited actually longer than a full year, but I was able to see like sometimes it rains a lot and then we have this little lake. If I had not waited and just started planting willy-nilly, I wouldn't have been able to see that. So can you speak to some of that as far as using permaculture?
So one of the keys to when you're implementing permaculture and looking at planning out your designs is they talk about making sure you observe and interact. And so what you're talking about is that observation period. And most recommendations say you want to wait and see all 4 seasons on a property before you start planning so that you can see where those microclimates are. You can see where the water may be collecting. You can see where's the cold air collect, where's the warm air collect. These are all things that will help you in planning out where you're planting your plants, where you're putting your structures, where is the water flowing, and do I need to one stop it, do I need to slow it, do I need to spread it, and I need to soak it. Those techniques are helped when you have a good understanding of what the property is actually doing, and seeing it in all 4 seasons is what's going to help you.
Yeah.
But here's one of the things that I love to make sure that people don't get into excuse-itis or I can't do it now. Just because you're observing your property doesn't mean you can't get started right away. You can still do temporary things, whether it's things in pots, whether it's annuals that you can pull out and it's not going to be a big thing because, hey, these will be done in 60 days. Not much is going to go terrible in 60 days. And so don't let that be a button to say, well, I don't have to do anything on my homestead because I'm watching it for a year. But yes, do watch your property, figure out what happens within those 4 seasons. One of the things that also helps is make sure you take pictures. If you have a phone, take a picture with your phone. That means once you take that picture, you have a date and a time when that happened, and you can go back and look through based off of your location and saying, okay, what happened at my property throughout the year, and review. Oh, it was very rainy in March. Oh, it was very dry in August. Oh, do you know that tree was blooming in late October? I didn't know that tree would be blooming in late October. And so that's part of that observation, being able to take those things. Because remember how we talked about interconnecting things? You want to find out what resources you have available and then see how you can interconnect those so that you can get a multiplication effect on what you're planning. And so by observing, you can see what's happening in your environment and then multiply your results based on what you see and being able to connect those different things.
That's awesome. That helps me understand, like, for one, when you gave me like that you kind of gave me that permission, like observe your land and, like to not have to rush. But like you were saying, also, it's not an excuse to not do anything either. Okay. What books or YouTube videos or anything like that do you recommend someone read or watch if they want to get more into this topic?
Books I would recommend for studying a little bit on permaculture. One of the easiest ones to get into, most approachable, is probably going to be Gaia's Garden by Toby Hemingway. He takes a very backyard approach to explaining what permaculture is, how to design using permaculture. And it also has a really good index on the back when it talks about planting plants together, companion planting, putting guilds together so you maximize those results you're getting from the plants you're putting in the ground. That's also a good reference for that as well. When it comes to YouTube, I would recommend looking at everything, but taking everything with a grain of salt. Because permaculture is what it is, it's an open source system, and anybody can say what they want about permaculture. Doesn't necessarily mean that it's permaculture. If it's not following those 3 ethics, then it's probably not permaculture. And if they're calling a technique permaculture, or this is a permaculture garden, or this is a permaculture herb spiral, then they probably don't know what they're talking about when it comes to permaculture. So yeah, just take it with a grain of salt when you're looking at that. Books, Bill Mollison, David Holgram, founders of permaculture, great people to find or follow. There's lots of permaculture teachers out there. Here's what I always tell people: when you're looking for a permaculture teacher, or you're looking for a PDC, which is a permaculture design certificated course that you're going to take, usually it's 72 hours. When you're looking at those courses, you want to find someone who lights your fire, makes the bulb go off in your head, that, oh, I get it. And that could be anybody from a Rob Avis, who is a former engineer who went into permaculture design, and he now teaches permaculture. And now his design process teaches on the engineering side. It's very, very scientific, very dot your I's, cross your T's. He may light your fire. You may want to follow him. There may be other guys who are may more. Andrew Mullison, who teaches out of Oregon State. He is very much a teacher with all the best PowerPoints and 3D animations and all of the, great stuff, teaching aids. So maybe that lights your fire. And that may be someone you want to follow and look at and taking their PDC. Jeff Lawton, taught by, Bill Mollison, great permaculture teacher. Highly recommend his courses as well. One of the guys we were talking to on Clubhouse, Larry Santoyo, also a permaculture teacher, designer, taught by Bill Mollison as well, has a great school out in California. So yeah, there's tons of guys out there that you can learn from. Always look and make sure that it's actually speaking to you, and then make sure that they're, if they're following those principles in general practices of permaculture, you're going to be okay.
Yeah, and thank you for that list of people. So if anybody's interested, make sure you write those names down. Well, I think that's probably good for the beginners here. The topic is simple, but it can be complex as well, the more you get into it. So I feel like we scratched the surface and it was good. And I feel like the thing that I took mostly away from it is what was the thing that you said in the beginning where it was
organized common sense.
Organized common sense.
Permaculture is organized common sense.
Okay, well, thank you so much. How can people find you? Like where can we find you I know you do media stuff.
Yeah, you can, if you want to follow our adventure on building an urban homestead and then eventually moving out to a rural homestead. We're looking for property now. We're at libertyspringsfarm.com. That's where we've called our farm, and I think I have it on here. Yeah, there you go. Liberty Springs. Liberty Springs is the name of our farm. We started that in Virginia, brought that out here as well. And so, yeah, Liberty Springs on Instagram, Facebook. I mean, you name it. I'm a media guy, so I try to get all my handles everywhere. But yeah, libertyspringsfarm.com.
Okay. Thank you so much, Larry.
You're welcome.